The fingers on Tessa Clarke's right hand bent at angles that made Jacob Rowe's stomach turn when he found her collapsed behind the livery stable in Pioche, Nevada, that scorching July afternoon in 1877. She was barely conscious, her lips cracked and bleeding, her dress torn and covered in dust that spoke of days spent wandering through the desert hills surrounding the silver mining town. The bread clutched in her left hand was stale and hard as a rock, evidence of the theft that had earned her such brutal punishment. Jacob had come to Pioche 3 months earlier, driving cattle through from California, and had stayed on working odd jobs at the Silver Ridge Ranch when he realized the town's wildness suited him better than the increasingly civilized coast. He was 24 years old, tall and weathered from years of outdoor work, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that had seen enough of human cruelty to recognize it instantly in the swollen, misshapen fingers of the young woman lying in the dirt. He knelt beside her, his shadow offering merciful shade from the relentless sun. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, gray as storm clouds and filled immediately with fear. She tried to scramble backward, clutching the bread closer to her chest with her good hand, a soft cry of pain escaping when she accidentally moved her broken fingers. "Easy now," Jacob said, his voice low and gentle. "I am not going to hurt you. Let me help." "No one helps," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Everyone wants something." He could see she was young, probably around 20, with auburn hair matted against her pale face and a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond physical weariness. Her eyes held the wariness of a wild animal that had learned humans brought only pain. "I do not want anything except to see you are not dying in an alley," Jacob said, settling back on his heels to give her space. "Those fingers need tending. When did it happen?" Tessa stared at him, trying to determine if this was some new trap. She had been in Pioche for 6 weeks, arriving after fleeing an arranged marriage back in Ohio to a man 3 times her age. She had worked as a laundress for 2 weeks before the mine owner's wife accused her of stealing a brooch Tessa had never seen. Without proof of innocence or money for a lawyer, she had been turned out. The last 4 weeks had been a nightmare of hunger and desperation, sleeping in abandoned mine shafts and begging for work that never came. 3 days ago, she finally answered, her voice barely audible. "The baker caught me. His sons held me down while he broke them, one by one." Jacob's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes, but he kept his voice steady. "Morrison's Bakery." She nodded slightly, and he cursed under his breath. Paul Morrison was known for his cruelty, a man who had come to Pioche during the silver rush and had grown fat on the desperation of miners and drifters. That he would do this to a starving woman trying to survive did not surprise Jacob, but it sickened him nonetheless. "I have a room at the boarding house," Jacob said. "It is not much, just a bed and a table, but it is clean and private. Let me take you there, splint those fingers properly, and get some food in you." "Why?" The question came out sharp with suspicion. Jacob met her eyes steadily. "Because somebody should. Because I had a sister once who might have needed the same kindness, except she died before anyone could offer it. Because it is the right thing to do." Something in his tone, in the grief that flickered briefly across his face, made Tessa believe him. She was too weak to keep running, too hungry to refuse, and those fingers were beginning to throb with an intensity that made her vision blur. She gave a slight nod, and Jacob carefully helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they made their slow way down the alley. The boarding house was run by Miriam Fletcher, a widow who asked no questions when Jacob appeared with Tessa, and said she was his cousin who had taken ill on the journey to town. Miriam took one look at the broken fingers and the girl's condition and simply nodded, bringing up clean water and cloth without comment. In a place like Pioche, where violence was as common as dust, and most people had secrets they preferred to keep, discretion was a valuable currency. Jacob's room was small and spare, containing only a narrow bed, a wooden table with one chair, a trunk for his belongings, and a washstand. He settled Tessa in the chair and began examining her hand with surprising gentleness for a man whose own hands were scarred and calloused from hard labor. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "The bones need to be set straight before I splint them, or they will heal crooked and you will never have proper use of them again." Tessa's face went even paler, but she straightened her spine and held out her hand. "Do it." He worked as quickly and carefully as he could, and to her credit, she made no sound beyond a few sharp intakes of breath, though tears streamed down her face and her left hand gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. Jacob had learned basic doctoring from a trail boss years ago, and his hands were steady as he aligned each broken finger and bound them with splints he fashioned from kindling and strips of clean cloth. When it was done, Tessa slumped in the chair, her face gray with pain and exhaustion. Jacob brought her water, which she drank in desperate gulps, then made her slow down before she made herself sick. He left briefly and returned with bread, cheese, and cold beef from the boarding house kitchen, along with a promise to pay extra for the additional food. "Slowly," he cautioned as Tessa reached for the food with her good hand. "Your stomach is not used to it. If you eat too fast, you will just bring it back up." She forced herself to take small bites, though every instinct screamed at her to devour everything in front of her. The food was simple, but it tasted like heaven after weeks of near starvation. Jacob sat on the edge of the bed, watching to make sure she followed his advice, and found himself studying her face. Beneath the dirt and exhaustion, she was beautiful in an understated way, with delicate features and those extraordinary gray eyes that seemed to hold depths of strength despite her circumstances. "What is your name?" he asked. Tessa Clarke." She paused, chewing carefully. "You said you had a sister." Jacob's expression grew distant. "Mary. She was 2 years younger than me. We grew up in Missouri and our parents died when I was 16. I tried to take care of us both, but I was just a kid myself, and I made a lot of mistakes. She got sick one winter, and I did not have money for a doctor. She died 3 days before her 15th birthday." "I am sorry," Tessa said softly, and meant it. "It was 8 years ago now, but I think about her every day, wonder what kind of woman she would have grown into." He shook himself slightly, bringing his attention back to the present. "What brought you to Pioche?" Tessa told him the story in halting sentences between careful bites of food. The father who had gambled away everything they had and tried to sell her to settle his debts. The 50-year-old creditor who wanted a young wife and did not care that Tessa found him repulsive. Her escape in the night with nothing but the clothes on her back and $3 she had hidden away. The journey west that had taken all her money and left her stranded in this harsh silver mining town. "I thought I could start over," she said, her voice heavy with exhausted defeat. "I thought out here, nobody would care about my past or my family. I thought if I just worked hard enough, I could build a real life." "You still can," Jacob said firmly. "Those fingers will heal. It will take time, maybe 2 months before the splints can come off, but if you are patient and let them mend properly, you will have full use of them again." 2 months, Tessa repeated, the words landing like stones. "I could not survive 4 weeks on my own. How am I supposed to manage 2 more? "You are not on your own anymore," Jacob said, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. "You can stay here. I will bring you food, make sure you are safe while you heal. Once the splints come off and you are stronger, you can find work and get back on your feet." Tessa stared at him, disbelief and hope warring in her expression. "You cannot mean that. You do not even know me." "I know you had the courage to run from a life that would have crushed you. I know you kept fighting even when it meant you were starving. I know you are strong enough to survive Morrison breaking your fingers and still hold onto that bread." Jacob held her gaze. "I know that is more than enough reason to help. What do you want in return?" The question was blunt, born of too many hard lessons about the price of kindness. "Nothing." Jacob's voice was steady and clear. "I want nothing from you, Tessa. You heal, you get strong, and when you are ready, you build that life you came here looking for. That is all." She searched his face for a long moment, looking for the lie, the hidden agenda, the catch that always came. But his brown eyes were steady and honest, and something in her chest that had been locked tight for months began to cautiously unfold. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." Over the following days, a routine developed. Jacob would leave early for his work at the Silver Ridge Ranch, where he broke horses and mended fences, and did whatever other tasks needed doing. He would return at midday with food from the boarding house kitchen, sitting with Tessa while she ate and changing the bandages on her hand to make sure infection was not setting in. In the evenings, he would come back with dinner and spend an hour or two before heading down to the common room to give her privacy for sleeping. Tessa occupied the bed while Jacob made himself a pallet on the floor, despite her protests. "You are the one doing manual labor all day," she argued. "You need the bed more than I do. You are healing from broken bones and near starvation," he countered. "The bed is yours until you are well. I have slept on harder ground than this." As the days turned into weeks, they began to talk in earnest. Jacob told her about his years drifting after Mary's death, working cattle drives and mining camps, never staying anywhere long because staying meant forming attachments, and attachments meant the possibility of loss. Tessa shared stories of her childhood before her father's gambling destroyed everything, of her mother who had died when Tessa was 12, of the dreams she had once harbored of becoming a teacher. "You could still do that," Jacob said one evening as they sat by the window watching the sun set over the mountains. "Once you are healed, there are schools opening up all through Nevada. Mining towns need teachers for the children." "I did not finish school myself," Tessa admitted. "After Mama died, Papa could not afford to keep sending me. I only made it through the 8th grade. That is more education than most people out here have. And you are clever. I can tell by the way you talk, the way you think about things." Jacob leaned back against the wall. "If you wanted it badly enough, you could find a way." The conviction in his voice made her want to believe him. In the month since he had found her behind the livery stable, Tessa had begun to feel almost human again. Her body was recovering from the starvation, filling out slowly as regular meals did their work. The constant fear that had haunted her for weeks was fading, replaced by a tentative sense of safety. And her fingers, though still immobilized in their splints, were healing without infection. But more than the physical recovery, something else was happening. She found herself listening for Jacob's footsteps on the stairs, feeling her heart lift when he walked through the door. She noticed things about him. The way he was unfailingly gentle when checking her bandages, though his hands were rough from labor. The way he always made sure she had eaten her fill before he touched his own food. The way his whole face changed when he smiled, rare as those smiles were, warmth flooding into eyes that were usually guarded. Jacob was noticing things too, though he tried not to. The way Tessa's hair caught the light when she sat by the window, revealing shades of copper and gold in the auburn. The soft sound of her laugh when he told a story about a particularly stubborn horse at the ranch. The intelligence in her eyes when they discussed books they had both read, finding common ground in shared stories. The way she had begun to look at him when she thought he was not paying attention, something tender and wondering in her expression. He was falling for her, and that terrified him. He had sworn after Mary's death that he would never care that much again, never give his heart to anyone else who could be taken away. But Tessa was breaking through every wall he had built, and he found himself powerless to stop it. 6 weeks after that first day, Jacob came back to the room to find Tessa standing by the window, tears streaming down her face. He dropped the food he was carrying and was at her side in 2 strides. "What happened? Are you hurt? Is it your hand?" She shook her head, unable to speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it was choked with emotion. "I moved them, my fingers, just a little bit, but I could feel them respond. The bones are healing, Jacob. They are really healing." Relief and joy washed over him, and without thinking, he pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest, and they stood there holding each other as she cried tears of gratitude and hope. Jacob rested his cheek against her hair, breathing in the scent of the lavender soap Miriam had provided, and felt something slot into place in his chest. When Tessa finally pulled back, looking up at him with those gray eyes bright with tears, the air between them changed. Jacob lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to move away, and gently cupped her face. She leaned into his touch, her breath catching. "Tessa," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." "I know," she whispered. "I know because I feel it too." He kissed her then, soft and careful, and she rose on her toes to meet him, her good hand coming up to rest against his chest where his heart was pounding. The kiss was tender and sweet and full of all the words neither of them had dared to speak. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, foreheads resting together. "I did not plan this," Jacob said. "I swear I did not bring you here expecting anything like this." "I know," Tessa said again. "That is why it means so much. You saw me at my absolute worst when I had nothing to offer anyone, and you helped me anyway. You gave me back my life, Jacob. How could I not love you for that? You love me." The words came out wondering, almost disbelieving. "I love you," she confirmed, her voice steady and sure despite the emotion in her eyes. "I think I started falling the day you set my fingers, when you were so gentle, even though I know it must have been difficult for you to hurt me even to help me. I love your kindness and your strength, and the way you have never once made me feel like I owed you anything. I love you, Jacob Rowe." He kissed her again, deeper this time, pouring 8 years of loneliness and grief into the embrace, and finding in her response a healing he had not known he needed. When they finally broke apart, he pressed kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose, making her laugh breathlessly. "I love you too," he said against her temple. "I tried not to. I tried to keep my distance, to just help you and then let you go on with your life. But Tessa, you are in my blood now, you are in my heart. I cannot imagine letting you walk away." "Then do not," she said simply. "Let me stay. Not just until I heal, but after. Let me stay with you." Jacob pulled back slightly, his expression serious. "I want that more than anything, but I want to do it right. You deserve better than people whispering about you living with a man who is not your husband. When you are fully healed, when you are strong enough to make the choice freely, I want to marry you, Tessa. I want to make this real and permanent and respectable." "I do not care what people whisper," Tessa protested, but Jacob shook his head. "I care. You have been through too much already. I will not add to it by damaging your reputation." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. "Besides, I am a traditional man. I want to court you properly, even if the circumstances are unusual. I want to give you the time to be absolutely sure this is what you want." Tessa wanted to argue that she was already sure, that she had never been more certain of anything in her life. but she could see the conviction in Jacob's eyes, and she understood that this was important to him. So she nodded, smiling up at him. "Court me then, Jacob Rowe. Though I warn you, I am already entirely won over. Then I will just have to work to keep you that way," he said, grinning. The next 2 months passed in a glow of happiness unlike anything either of them had ever known. Jacob continued to be scrupulous about propriety, always making sure Miriam knew Tessa was chaperoned, always sleeping on his pallet on the floor. But within the bounds of respectability, he courted Tessa with wholehearted devotion. He brought her wildflowers from the hills around the ranch, their bright colors a stark contrast to the dusty silver town. He borrowed books from the ranch owner's wife and read to Tessa in the evenings, the two of them discussing the stories long into the night. When her fingers had healed enough to remove the splints, he held her hand gently as she carefully flexed them, working to restore the strength and dexterity. Tessa bloomed under his attention and care. Her body filled out, her cheeks gaining color and her eyes losing the haunted look that had shadowed them. Her fingers healed remarkably well, with only slight stiffness that diminished more each day as she exercised them. She began helping Miriam with light chores around the boarding house, insisting on earning her keep now that she was able, and the older woman took a liking to her, teaching her better cooking and household management skills. But the best times were still those hours alone with Jacob, when they could talk freely and steal kisses when no one was watching. They learned each other in small increments. Tessa discovered that Jacob had a wry sense of humor that emerged when he felt comfortable, and that he could play the harmonica beautifully, filling the room with haunting melodies on quiet evenings. Jacob learned that Tessa had a gift for storytelling, weaving elaborate tales that transported them both far from the rough silver town, and that she was far braver than she gave herself credit for, facing each day's challenges with quiet determination. 10 weeks after Jacob had found Tessa in the alley, on a September morning when autumn was just beginning to touch the mountain peaks with gold, he came back to the boarding house at midday and asked her to take a walk with him. They strolled through the town to the edge of the settlement, where the buildings gave way to scrubland, and the view opened up to show the mountains in the distance. Jacob took both of Tessa's hands in his, looking down at fingers that had healed straight and strong, and then up into her eyes. "You are fully healed now," he said. "Strong and healthy and capable of making your own way. You could leave Pioche if you wanted, go somewhere bigger where there are more opportunities. You could apply to those teaching positions we talked about. You could do anything you set your mind to, Tessa." Her heart began to pound, uncertainty flickering through her. "Are you trying to tell me you want me to leave?" "God, no." The words came out fierce and immediate. "I am trying to tell you that you are free to choose. Not because you are dependent on me or obligated to me, but because you truly want to. And I am asking, if you do want to stay, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, not out of gratitude or necessity, but because you love me and want to build a life with me?" Tessa's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, a joy so intense it seemed to radiate from her very core. "Yes. Yes, Jacob, I will marry you. Not because I am grateful, though I am. Not because I need you to survive, though you saved my life in every way that matters. But because I love you with everything I am, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Jacob let out a breath he had not realized he was holding and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around as she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, not caring who might see, pouring all his love and commitment into the embrace. They were married a week later by the circuit preacher who came through Pioche, with Miriam Fletcher and the ranch foreman standing as witnesses. Tessa wore a simple but pretty dress of pale blue that Miriam had helped her make, and Jacob wore his best shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed for once. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Jacob kissed his bride with such tender passion that even the cynical miners watching broke into applause. The ranch owner, impressed by Jacob's work and his obvious devotion to his new wife, offered them a small cabin on the edge of the ranch property. It had been used as a line shack but had been sitting empty, and with some work, it could be made into a comfortable home. Jacob and Tessa threw themselves into the project, spending every spare moment cleaning and repairing, making the rough cabin into something that felt like theirs. Tessa painted the walls with whitewash, making the interior bright and clean. Jacob built new furniture, a proper bed frame and a table with 2 chairs and shelves for the books they were slowly collecting. They planted a small garden in the spring, Tessa's healed fingers nimble and strong as she worked the soil. Wildflowers that she transplanted from the hills bloomed around the doorway, adding color to the rough landscape. Life was not easy. Jacob's work was hard and sometimes dangerous, and there were lean months when money was tight. But they were happy in a way that went bone deep, a contentment that came from being exactly where they wanted to be, with exactly who they wanted to be with. They learned the rhythms of married life, the small compromises and daily kindnesses that built something strong and lasting. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch of their cabin and watch the sun set over the mountains, Jacob's arm around Tessa's shoulders and her head resting against his chest. They would talk about their days and their dreams, making plans for the future. Tessa had not given up on her desire to teach, and Jacob encouraged her to study in her spare time, preparing for the day when she might apply for a position at one of the schools opening in the territory. A year after their marriage, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with a mixture of joy and terror. Jacob remembered too well losing his mother and sister, and the fear of losing Tessa or their child haunted him. But Tessa, though nervous, was determined and strong. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she told him when she found him standing outside the cabin one night, staring at the stars and trying to calm his racing heart. "I am healthy and strong, and we will get through this together." "I cannot lose you," he said, his voice rough. "Tessa, I cannot." She took his face in her hands, those fingers that had once been broken and that he had so carefully mended now strong and sure against his skin. "You are not going to lose me. We are going to have this baby, and we are going to raise them together, and we are going to have a beautiful life. Do you hear me?" He nodded, leaning into her touch, drawing strength from her certainty. "I hear you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Jacob hovered over Tessa like an anxious mother hen, much to her alternating amusement and exasperation. As her belly grew round with their child, he would place his hand against it and marvel at the life they had created together. The baby would kick against his palm, and Tessa would laugh at the wonder on his face. On a warm June evening in 1879, 2 years after Jacob had found Tessa broken and starving in an alley, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Jacob's old fears threatened to overwhelm him. But Tessa was strong, and with the help of the ranch owner's wife who had experience with birthing, she brought their child safely into the world. Jacob held his son for the first time with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny, perfect features. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "Tessa, he is so beautiful." "What should we name him?" Tessa asked, exhausted but glowing with happiness. Jacob thought of the sister he had lost, the guilt he had carried for so many years, and the woman who had given him a reason to finally forgive himself. "Thomas," he said, "after your grandfather you told me about, and his middle name can be Marcus after my father." Thomas Marcus Rowe, Tessa said, trying out the name. It is perfect. Watching Jacob with their son over the following weeks and months, Tessa fell in love with him all over again. He was a devoted father, patient and gentle, rising in the night to walk the floor with Thomas when he fussed so that Tessa could rest. He would talk to the baby as he worked, explaining what he was doing in a soft, steady voice, and Thomas would watch him with wide, wondering eyes. As Thomas grew from an infant into a toddler, their little family found its rhythm. Tessa had begun teaching Thomas his letters before he was even 2, her dream of being a teacher finding its first expression in her own son. Jacob taught the boy about horses and the land, carrying him in a sling while he worked so Thomas could see everything. When Thomas was 3, the ranch owner approached Jacob with an offer. He was getting older and wanted to spend more time in San Francisco with his daughter. He proposed that Jacob take over as ranch manager, a position that came with more responsibility, but also significantly better pay, and the option to eventually buy a stake in the ranch itself. Jacob discussed it with Tessa that night after Thomas was asleep, the two of them sitting at their kitchen table with cups of coffee growing cold between them. "It is a big step," Jacob said. "More work, more pressure, but it would mean security for us, for Thomas. It would mean we could start saving real money, maybe buy our own land someday." "You should do it," Tessa said without hesitation. "Jacob, you are already doing half the work of managing this ranch. You know every inch of this land, every horse, every head of cattle. The men respect you. You would be wonderful at it. You have that much faith in me?" he asked, reaching across to take her hand. She threaded her fingers through his, those fingers that bore only the faintest stiffness as a reminder of what they had both survived. "I have always had that much faith in you. From the very beginning when you saw me at my lowest and chose to help. You are the best man I know, Jacob Rowe." He accepted the position, and over the next several years he proved Tessa's faith well-founded. Under his management, the Silver Ridge Ranch prospered. He was fair with the ranch hands, firm when necessary but never cruel, and his knowledge of horses made the ranch's stock some of the most sought after in Nevada. The financial security allowed them to make improvements to their home, adding rooms as their family grew. When Thomas was 4, Tessa gave birth to their daughter, whom they named Elizabeth Mary, honoring both of their mothers. 2 years later, another son arrived, Samuel Jacob, completing their family. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house, with 3 bedrooms and a parlor and a kitchen large enough for Tessa to work in comfortably through it all. The love between Jacob and Tessa only deepened. They had seen each other at their worst and their best, had weathered hardships and celebrated triumphs, and had built something neither had dared to dream of in those early desperate days. On quiet nights after the children were asleep, they would still sit together on their porch, watching the stars and remembering. "You ever think about that day?" Tessa asked one evening when Thomas was 7, Elizabeth 3, and Samuel a rambunctious toddler of 1. "The day you found me." "Every single day," Jacob admitted, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "I think about how close I came to never meeting you if I had taken a different route through town, if I had been even a few hours later. I think about how you looked, so broken and afraid, and how you fought to survive anyway. And I thank God that I found you, that I was given the chance to love you." "I was dying," Tessa said quietly. "Not just my body, though that too, but my spirit, my hope, everything that made me who I am. I had given up, Jacob. I was just going through the motions of survival without any belief that things could get better. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had been too defeated to even say." "We saved each other," Jacob said. "You gave me a reason to stop running from my past, to stop being afraid of caring about someone. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose beyond just existing. You saved me just as much as I saved you." Tessa turned to kiss him, a gentle press of lips that still sent warmth flooding through her chest after all these years. "We built a good life," she said. "I know it was not what either of us expected or planned, but Jacob, I would not change a single moment. Even the hard parts, even the pain, because it brought us here." "Neither would I," he agreed. "Not one moment." As the years continued to pass, their children grew strong and bright. Thomas showed his father's quiet strength and his mother's intelligence, excelling in the small school that had finally opened in Pioche. Elizabeth was bold and adventurous, always climbing trees and riding horses, despite Tessa's occasional heart attacks of worry. Samuel was gentle and thoughtful, with a gift for drawing that had them all marveling at his sketches. Tessa had finally achieved her dream of teaching, though not in the way she had once imagined. She tutored children on the ranch and in town, working with those who struggled in school or whose families could not afford to send them regularly. She charged little or nothing, remembering too well what it was like to be desperate and without resources. Jacob supported her fully, proud of the difference she was making in young lives. When Thomas was 15, a representative from a university in California visited the ranch, having heard of the bright young man who excelled in mathematics and literature. He offered Thomas a scholarship, a chance to get the kind of education neither of his parents had been able to pursue. It was a bittersweet moment, the realization that their oldest child would be leaving to chase his own dreams, but both Jacob and Tessa encouraged him wholeheartedly. "You have been given an opportunity your mother and I never had," Jacob told Thomas the night before he left for California. "Take it with both hands, learn everything you can, make something of yourself, but never forget where you came from or the values we tried to teach you." "I will make you proud," Thomas promised, and his parents assured him he already had. Elizabeth eventually followed her father into ranch work, proving to have a natural gift with horses that exceeded even Jacob's considerable skill. She was particularly good with difficult or traumatized animals, approaching them with a patience and gentleness that coaxed them into trust. By the time she was 17, people were bringing horses from 3 counties away for her to train. Samuel's artistic talents led him in a different direction. A traveling artist passing through Nevada saw his work and offered to take him as an apprentice. After much family discussion, it was decided that Samuel would go, though Tessa wept to see another of her children leave home. But she and Jacob agreed that they had not survived their own hardships just to hold their children back from their dreams. The house felt emptier with only Elizabeth still at home, and both Jacob and Tessa felt the weight of middle age settling on their shoulders. Jacob was 49 now, his dark hair heavily threaded with silver, though he was still strong and capable. Tessa was 45, laugh lines crinkling the corners of her eyes, her auburn hair fading to a softer shade mixed with gray. But if anything, they loved each other more deeply than ever, their connection weathered and tested and proven unbreakable. They had faced so much together over the 25 years since that July day in 1877. Harsh winters and brutal summers, financial struggles and triumphs, the joys of their children and the sorrows of losing friends. Through it all, they had been each other's constant, each other's home. When Elizabeth married a young man from a neighboring ranch, a good man whom Jacob approved of and Tessa adored, the wedding was held at the Silver Ridge Ranch with half of Pioche in attendance. Standing under the arch of flowers that Thomas had come home from university to help build, watching their daughter glow with happiness as she pledged her life to the man she loved, Jacob and Tessa held hands and remembered their own simple ceremony. "We have done well," Jacob whispered to his wife. "Look at what we built from nothing. From broken fingers and stale bread," Tessa said, smiling up at him. "From a cowboy with a kind heart who decided to help a stranger." "Best decision I ever made," Jacob said, kissing her temple. A year later, Elizabeth gave birth to a daughter, making Jacob and Tessa grandparents. Holding the tiny infant, Jacob was transported back to the night Thomas was born, to the overwhelming love and fear he had felt. But this time, the fear was muted, replaced by wonder and gratitude for the life that had brought him to this moment. Thomas finished his university education and returned to Nevada, taking a position as a schoolteacher in Carson City. He wrote to his parents weekly, letters filled with affection and stories about his students that made Tessa's heart swell with pride. Her son was doing what she had once dreamed of doing, and she could not have been happier for him. Samuel's artistic career flourished, and his paintings began to appear in galleries in San Francisco and even further afield. He sent paintings home to his parents, beautiful landscapes that captured the harsh magnificence of the Nevada desert they loved. One painting in particular held pride of place above the fireplace, a scene of their house at sunset with the mountains in the background, a tribute to the home that had sheltered and nurtured him. As Jacob and Tessa entered their 50s, the ranch owner made good on his long-standing offer and sold Jacob a full partnership in the Silver Ridge Ranch. It was the culmination of decades of hard work and dedication, and it meant permanent security for their family. They were landowners now, respected members of the community, their difficult pasts long since overshadowed by the lives they had built. On a warm evening in July of 1902, 25 years to the day since Jacob had found Tessa behind the livery stable, they hosted a celebration at the ranch. Their children had all come home for the occasion, bringing grandchildren who filled the house with laughter and noise. Friends and neighbors from across the county attended, testament to the roots Jacob and Tessa had put down in this harsh land. As the party wound down and the guests began to depart, Jacob and Tessa slipped away from the crowd, walking hand in hand to the spot where their original cabin had stood before they expanded it into the house. The foundation stones were still visible, marking the place where their married life had truly begun. 25 years, Tessa said, leaning against Jacob's shoulder. A quarter of a century. Sometimes it feels like it has been forever, and sometimes it feels like only yesterday that you were splinting my broken fingers in that tiny boarding house room. "I remember every moment of that day," Jacob said. "How frightened you looked, how brave. How you were willing to let me cause you pain if it meant you would heal properly. I fell a little bit in love with you right then, I think, though it took me weeks to admit it to myself. I was so afraid to hope," Tessa admitted. "I had been disappointed and betrayed so many times that I could not believe you were really as good as you seemed. I kept waiting for you to show your true colors, to demand payment for your kindness. And instead, I just kept splinting fingers and bringing you food." Jacob smiled, the expression soft with memory. "Instead you gave me my life back," Tessa corrected. "You gave me yourself and a family and a home and more happiness than I ever thought possible. You took a woman with broken fingers who had stolen bread to survive and made her into someone who matters, who has value, who is loved beyond measure." Jacob turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Even now, decades later, he was still careful with her right hand, still conscious of the injury that had brought them together. "You always mattered, Tessa. You always had value. All I did was see it when you had temporarily forgotten." She rose on her toes to kiss him, this man who had been her savior and her partner, her lover and her dearest friend. The kiss was tender and familiar, carrying the weight of 25 years of love and commitment. "We should get back to the party," Tessa said when they finally broke apart, though she made no move to leave. "Our grandchildren will be looking for us." "They can wait another minute," Jacob said, pulling her close and beginning to sway gently, humming a waltz they had danced to at Elizabeth's wedding. Tessa laughed and followed his lead, and they danced there in the fading light, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful from the ashes of their broken pasts. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they finally made their way back to the house, where the sound of laughter and music spilled out into the night. Their children greeted them with knowing smiles, understanding that their parents had needed that moment alone together. The grandchildren clamored for stories, and Jacob and Tessa settled into chairs surrounded by family, taking turns recounting tales from their lives. But they did not tell the story of how they met, not that night. That story was theirs alone, private and precious. The children knew only that their parents had met in Pioche and fallen in love, and that was enough. The details of broken fingers and stolen bread and a cowboy who had chosen kindness were treasures that Jacob and Tessa held close, reminders of how far they had come and how much they had overcome. In the years that followed, as they moved into their 60s, Jacob and Tessa gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, turning more and more responsibility over to Elizabeth and her husband. They had earned their rest, and they spent their days in quiet contentment, working in Tessa's expanded garden, taking long rides through the hills they loved, and spoiling their growing number of grandchildren. Thomas married a teacher he met in Carson City, a woman as intelligent and kind as his mother. Samuel fell in love with the daughter of a gallery owner in San Francisco, a sophisticated woman who nevertheless understood and supported his artistic vision. Both weddings were joyous occasions that brought the family together in celebration. As their 70th birthdays approached, both Jacob and Tessa sometimes marveled at the sheer, unlikely improbability of the life they had lived. That a chance encounter in an alley in a rough silver mining town had led to half a century of love and partnership seemed almost too miraculous to believe. But the evidence was all around them in the house they had built, the children and grandchildren who bore their names and values, the land they had tended and loved. On quiet evenings, they would still sit on their porch, Jacob's arm around Tessa's shoulders and her head resting against his chest, watching the sun set over the mountains. They needed fewer words now than they once had, comfortable in the deep understanding that came from decades of sharing life. But sometimes, Tessa would hold up her right hand, flexing fingers that had healed straight and strong thanks to Jacob's care, and he would take that hand in his and kiss each finger gently. "Thank you," she would say, the two words encompassing everything. "Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for the family and the home and the beautiful years we have shared." And Jacob would pull her closer and respond with his own two words. "Thank you. Thank you for letting me help you. Thank you for teaching me to love again. Thank you for being my partner in building this extraordinary life." They were simple words, but they contained the whole story, every moment from that first desperate day to this peaceful evening. A story of survival and kindness, of love that grew from the most unlikely beginning into something that had changed the course of two lives and created ripples that would extend through generations. As the stars emerged in the darkening Nevada sky, and the night wind carried the scent of sage and wildflowers, Jacob and Tessa sat together in perfect contentment. Two souls who had found each other when they both needed saving and had spent a lifetime proving that love, when rooted in genuine care and respect, could overcome any hardship and build something lasting and true. Their story was not famous or grand in the eyes of the world. There were no books written about them, no songs sung of their love. But in the hearts of their children and grandchildren, in the land they had tended, in the small kindnesses they had shown to others throughout their lives, their story lived on. A testimony to the power of seeing someone in their darkest moment and choosing to offer help without expectation of reward. A reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with grand gestures, but with simple human compassion and broken fingers carefully splinted by hands that would hold them gently for the rest of their lives.